Some homes are built on terrain where most of us would never imagine anyone could live. A house clinging to a sheer cliff. A shelter standing alone in the middle of the ocean. Or an entire community living in treetops more than 98 feet above the rainforest floor. In places like these, one small mistake can cost you your life. But the hardest thing to believe is that people still choose to survive there. No readily available water, no convenient roads to get around. These are some of the craziest places people have ever built homes on the most dangerous terrain on the planet, where adaptation and the ability to survive go far beyond anything you could imagine. Wangshan Valley. Looking at the houses covering the cliffs of Wangshan Valley, the hardest thing to believe is how anyone managed to bring an entire construction site up there. This architectural complex was developed on the terrain of an old quarry in Jiangxi province, where steep slopes and cliffs divide the construction area across multiple elevations. Each house, walkway, and bridge had to be positioned around the existing rock formations, making it far more complicated to get materials and equipment exactly where they were needed than it would be on flat ground. In areas closest to the cliff, the structures had to be secured to the rock foundation before construction could continue above them. Wangshan Valley. Layer by layer, the architecture gradually extended along the mountainside. When night falls and the lights come on, what looked like separate rooftops suddenly reveals itself as an entire architectural complex stretching across the face of the old quarry. Sky Lodge Adventure Suites. Sky Lodge Adventure Suites in Peru's Sacred Valley does not sit at the foot of a mountain. It clings directly to a cliff about 1,312 feet above the valley. To reach the room, guests have to spend nearly 2 hours climbing a fixed route on the mountainside, clipping into safety cables as they make their way across sections of sheer rock before finally reaching the cabin door. Step inside, and 3 transparent walls open up to the vast Andes, with the cliff behind you and a deep drop stretching out directly below your feet. There is no staircase down. When the experience is over, the fastest way to leave is to launch yourself across the valley on a high-speed zip line. Sky Lodge has become one of the world's most famous cliffside hotels, where the journey just to reach your room is part of the experience itself. Catskill, Georgia. Catskill is a sheer limestone monolith rising 130 feet, roughly the height of a 10-story building, standing isolated in the valley. On top of this narrow rock, covering barely 150 square meters, ancient people, as far back as the 6th century, risked their lives to build a solid chapel. With no machinery, hauling tons of bricks and stone up a steep, slippery cliff using nothing but human strength and ropes was an insane feat. With no electricity and no running water, the monks who live here have to endure every kind of hardship. The only way up is a narrow iron ladder pressed against the cliff face. The climb takes 20 minutes with no safety protection. One monk, Father Maxime Kavtaradze, lived here alone for 20 straight years as an act of repentance. Every essential supply, from food to drinking water, is hauled up from the ground using a basic hand-operated winch and pulley system. Catskill is one of the most extreme examples of how faith and human determination can overcome the harshness of the terrain. Atula, China. If someone offered you $1 million to live here for a year, would you dare do it? Atula village in Liangshan, Sichuan province, southwestern China, sits at an elevation of more than 4,600 feet. In the past, the residents' only connection to the outside world was a descent down 17 wooden ladders linked together, including 2 nearly vertical sections stretching a combined 100 meters. The ladders were loose and dangerous. Children heading to school at the foot of the mountain had to spend 2 hours climbing down, often waking up at 5 in the morning. Because of these safety concerns, local authorities replaced them with a sturdy steel staircase containing 2,556 steps and handrails. Running water and 4G service were also installed to support the daily lives of the 70 households living here. Bivacco Gervasuti, Italy. Very few people would think of building a place to stay on an ice-covered mountainside at 9,400 feet, where even getting construction materials to the site becomes a dangerous challenge. It sits on the Frebuze slope in the Italian Alps, surrounded by steep rock, ice, snow, and weather that can change quickly. There is no road capable of bringing a complete structure up here, so the shelter was manufactured as separate modules down below. Helicopters then carried each section through the air, lifting them across the rugged terrain and lowering them onto the rocky slope for assembly on site. Completed in 2011, the cabin can accommodate about 12 people, with sleeping areas, a small kitchen, and solar power for climbing groups. Looking at the shelter standing alone among the ice and rock, it is hard to believe that the entire place had to fly across the Alps piece by piece before it could stand here. Buffa di Perrero. If you do not know exactly where to look, you could be standing in front of Monte Cristallo without realizing there is a shelter hidden inside the cliff. At more than 9,055 feet in the Italian Alps, Buffa di Perrero reveals only a small entrance on the grey rock face, while the space designed for people remains hidden behind it. The shelter dates back to World War I, when soldiers needed a place secluded enough to avoid detection while also protecting them from freezing winds, snow, ice, and the brutal conditions of the mountains. Inside are simple rooms for resting and storing essential supplies before they continued moving across the mountain. More than a century later, that trace of human presence is still there on Monte Cristallo. From a distance, all you see is a wall of rock. Move closer, and a doorway slowly begins to appear in a place where no one would expect people to have once lived behind it. Abuna Yematagu. If you want to attend a prayer service at Abuna Yamata in Ethiopia's Tigray region, the first thing you have to do is climb an 8,500-foot mountain before you can even touch the church door. There are no stairs or railings. Pilgrims grip natural handholds in the rock, edge along narrow ledges, and climb a nearly vertical section of cliff before reaching the entrance carved deep into the sandstone. Behind that door is a church dating back to the 5th century, where frescoes still cover the ceiling and walls after more than 1,500 years. Generations of priests and worshippers have continued making the climb to hold religious ceremonies, just as their ancestors did centuries ago. That treacherous journey has long been part of every visit to pray, because at Abuna Yamata, the path to church always begins on the cliff itself. Shinyuzai Cliff Convenience Store. Clinging to a sheer cliff in Shinyuzai Geopark in Hunan Province is a convenience store measuring less than 22 square feet, suspended about 394 feet above the bottom of the gorge. There is nothing but a deep drop below, making the tiny room look as if it has been attached directly to the mountainside, with barely any place to stand around it. It was built as a supply station for climbers tackling the Via Ferrata, providing water, snacks, and other essentials right in the middle of their climb. To reach the store, visitors have to clip into a safety cable system and make their way across U-shaped iron steps drilled directly into the cliff before finally reaching the small wooden door. Even more frightening is the job of the employees who work here. Every day, they have to wear safety harnesses and move along the edge of the drop while transporting supplies before squeezing into the cramped space to begin their shift. Dranga Lighthouse, Iceland. Dranga Lighthouse in Iceland does not stand on the mainland or even on an island. It sits alone on top of a basalt rock pillar in the North Atlantic, surrounded on every side by ocean waves. When the structure was built in 1939, there was no dock and no road for transporting materials to the top of the rock. Workers had to climb from boats onto the nearly vertical cliff, then haul wooden beams, bags of cement, and equipment up by rope before they could build the lighthouse. A small helipad was later added for maintenance, but every trip out there still depends on calm seas and suitable weather. Today, the lighthouse continues operating in the middle of the ocean, standing on a patch of rock only a few meters wide, like a tiny foothold created by humans in the open sea. Santuario Madonna, Italy. At first glance, Italy's Santuario Madonna della Corona looks as if it is growing straight out of the cliff, rather than being a church built by human hands. The entire church hugs a 2,600-foot rock wall, with what appears to be nothing behind it except the sheer mountainside. Beginning in the 15th century, monks expanded a natural cave and gradually built a pilgrimage site directly into this rugged mountain slope. Every block of stone, wooden beam, and building material had to be carried by people and donkeys along precarious mountain trails before modern roads existed. Even today, visitors still have to follow hundreds of steps running alongside the cliff to reach it. Standing in front of Santuario Madonna della Corona, it is difficult to tell where the natural rock ends and where generations of human construction begin. Cliff Cave Village, Afghanistan. Looking up at the cliffs of Bamiyan, it is hard to believe that some of the openings, dozens of meters above the ground, once served as entrances to people's homes. Hundreds of caves were carved directly into the rock centuries ago. Some are only a few square meters in size and sit about 40 to 70 meters above the ground, making access especially difficult during winter. Behind those small openings, there are no conventional frames or concrete walls because the rock itself forms the ceiling, walls, and living space. But that same structure has also endured centuries of erosion, rain, snow, and conflict. UNESCO has confirmed that many parts of the Bamiyan heritage site have seriously deteriorated, with some previously identified as being at risk of collapse and in need of reinforcement. Even so, during difficult periods, hundreds of families have turned to these ancient caves as places to live. Makoko, in Makoko, Nigeria, the day does not begin by stepping onto a street. It begins by stepping into a boat. In the middle of the Lagos Lagoon, more than 100,000 people live in wooden homes supported by thousands of stilts driven deep beneath the water. There are no streets, no sidewalks, and no cars. Taking children to school, transporting goods, going to the market, and fishing all happen along narrow waterways weaving between the houses. Even building a home becomes a race against the water, as every wooden piling has to be strong enough to withstand currents, tides, and seasonal storms. Despite flooding, pollution, and the constant threat of eviction, paddles continue cutting through the water every day, keeping this entire community moving across the lagoon. Ganlu Rock Temple. At Ganlu Rock Temple in Fujian Province, the first thing that hits you is the feeling that the temple is somehow suspended beneath a massive rock formation. Move closer, and you realize the roof above it was never built by human hands at all. Nearly 900 years ago, builders during the Song dynasty used a cliff rising more than 160 feet as a natural roof, then constructed the entire wooden structure beneath it using massive columns set directly into the rock foundation. This allowed the temple to remain sheltered from sun and rain without requiring a complete roof like a traditional temple. Even today, visitors still have to follow narrow paths, hugging the cliffside, before they can reach the architecture blending into the rock behind it. Standing beneath that stone overhang, it is difficult to tell where nature's work ends and where nearly 9 centuries of human construction begin. Perched Monastery, India. Building a monastery into a mountainside would normally begin with creating a foundation, but Perched Monastery in northern India began with a natural cave. More than 800 years ago, monks expanded a cave in the Zanskar mountainside into a multi-level monastery where dozens of people still live and study throughout the year. There is no road leading directly to the monastery, so for centuries, construction materials had to be carried by people or pack animals along precarious mountain trails. Walls of stone and mud were built to follow the terrain, helping the complex withstand harsh winters and the landslides that frequently occur in the valley. In mountains that feel almost completely cut off from the outside world, Perched Monastery shows how even a cave can become home to an entire community. Meteora Monasteries, Greece. The monasteries of Meteora, Greece, were not built on mountaintops. They sit precariously on sandstone pillars, rising hundreds of feet into the air, almost completely cut off from the world below. In the 14th century, monks chose these nearly isolated rock formations to build their places of worship, far from the wars and unrest unfolding in the valley below. Back then, there were no stairways or bridges connecting the cliffs. Every log, block of stone, and essential supply had to be hauled up from below using pulleys, nets, and ropes. On the limited space available at the top, they built walls, tiled roofs, and small courtyards where they could maintain their daily lives. Today, access is much easier, but standing beneath those sheer cliffs, it is hard to imagine how many people once returned home, suspended from a single rope high above the ground. Margherita Hut, Italy. To spend a night at Margarita Hut, you first have to reach the summit of Punta Gnifetti, nearly 15,000 feet above sea level. Surrounded by year-round ice and snow, this small structure has stood here since 1893 and is the highest inhabited building in Europe. When it was built, every wooden panel, steel beam, and construction material had to be transported by people and mules across glaciers before being assembled in thin air and brutal weather conditions. Despite the powerful winds and sub-zero temperatures outside, the interior still contains beds, a kitchen, and research facilities where people can stay for several days. Even today, after crossing glaciers and reaching the summit, the small door of Margarita Hut still opens to climbers looking for a night's rest in the middle of the Alps' vast fields of ice. Migingo Island. Step onto Migingo Island in the middle of Lake Victoria, and you may have a hard time seeing the ground at all. The island covers 21,500 square feet, yet almost every inch has been packed with corrugated metal homes, restaurants, shops, and narrow passageways weaving between the rooftops. Hundreds of people still live on this tiny patch of land, where every square meter is used to its limit, and building another home means finding one of the few remaining gaps. Migingo is surrounded by the vast waters of Lake Victoria, where sudden storms, limited fresh water, and a long-running territorial dispute between Kenya and Uganda are all part of life on the island. Yet every morning, fishing boats continue leaving the shore one after another, and as evening falls, the tiny island lights up in the middle of the lake like an overcrowded neighborhood floating on the water. Koh Phangan, Thailand. Looking down at Koh Phangan from above, it is hard to tell that most of this village is not standing on land at all. Hundreds of homes in Panga Bay are raised above the sea on a system of stilts driven into the seabed, turning a place with virtually no buildable ground into a home for more than 1,500 people. Every new house means extending the foundation farther out over the water, where tides rise and fall every day and salt water constantly wears away at the materials below. As a result, deteriorating structural elements have to be inspected, repaired, or replaced so the walkways and homes above can remain standing. Over more than 2 centuries, this method of construction has transformed a stretch of water beside the rocky island into an entire community. When the tide rises and hides the stilts below, the rooftops appear to sit directly on the sea, while everything holding the community above the water disappears beneath the surface. Yanjin County, China. The people of Yanjin in Yunnan province do not live packed together by choice. They were forced to build an entire town along a narrow strip of land, squeezed between 2 sheer mountain walls. In some sections, the valley along the Nangxi River is only about 100 feet wide, forcing roads, bridges, and residential areas to stretch out in a long, narrow line. With almost no room to expand, many homes are built on concrete columns planted right along the river's edge, while others lean against the mountainside behind them. Every rainy season, the Nangxi River rises directly below the residential areas, while the slopes above remain vulnerable to landslides. As a result, every remaining meter of land becomes a valuable resource, and every new project has to adapt to the limited space nature has left behind. Taiyuan Mountain Taoist Temple, China. Building a temple on a mountain is already difficult, but Taiyuan Mountain Taoist Temple in Shanxi Province sits on top of a rocky peak with barely enough space for a few temple halls to hold on. Since the Ming Dynasty, builders have carried timber, stone, and roof tiles to an elevation of more than 5,400 feet, then constructed the Taoist temple complex along the edge of the drop without leveling the terrain. Each hall makes maximum use of the limited space on top of the rock, while nearly vertical cliffs fall away below. After centuries of rain, wind, and snow, the temple remains a place where Taoist practitioners live and where pilgrims continue to travel into the isolated mountains. More than 500 years later, the temple still stands on that small rock formation high above the landscape, as if the place was never meant for people to live on at all. Unlivable, Indonesia. Hidden deep in the mountains and forests of Flores Island, Unlivable is one of the few villages where an entire community still lives in massive cone-shaped houses, much as people did centuries ago. At an elevation of 3,900 feet, reaching the village requires hours of hiking through the forest, so every log, bamboo pole, and bundle of thatch has to be carried up the mountain by hand. With only 7 Mbaru Niang houses, the entire village has sustained its way of life across generations. Each house rises through multiple levels, providing enough space for several families to eat, sleep, and store food beneath one roof. The cone-shaped design helps withstand heavy rain, strong winds, and the humid mountain climate. Even today, when mist settles over the Flores Valley, those 7 rooftops still rise from the forest much as they did when earlier generations built and lived in them hundreds of years ago. Yipianwa Zen Temple. For more than 400 years, Yipianwa Zen Temple on Mount Taimu in Fujian Province has existed with almost no traditional tiled temple roof of its own. Above the structure, a massive rock overhangs the mountainside, large enough to shelter the entire temple from strong winds, heavy rain, and the harsh mountain weather. Since the Ming Dynasty, monks have built temple halls within the narrow space beneath this natural stone roof, in a place where conventional construction was extremely difficult. Every wooden beam, roof tile, and building material had to be carried up the treacherous mountainside before being assembled into the main hall beside the cliff edge. Today, monks still chant and go about their daily lives beneath that stone roof, just as generations did before them, while the enormous rock overhead continues to shelter the entire temple in the same way nature shaped it millions of years ago. Korowai tribe territory. Whenever the Korowai people of Papua, Indonesia return home, they do not walk through a doorway at ground level. They climb ladders carved from tree trunks to reach homes built more than 100 feet high in the tops of ancient trees. Far above the forest canopy, every meal, every night's sleep, and every part of daily life takes place on wooden platforms suspended dozens of feet above the ground. To build these homes, they have to haul each log upward by hand, then assemble the floors, supports and roofs using wood, palm leaves, and rattan gathered directly from the forest. Below them are areas that frequently flood, along with insects, wild animals, and dense terrain that makes getting around anything but easy. For generations, these treetop homes have remained part of Korowai life, turning the forest canopy into a place where people have literally built a home. Tuiwa, Tibet. For most people, 16,500 feet is an altitude where they might stay for only a few hours before their bodies begin struggling with the lack of oxygen. But for more than 200 residents of Tuiwa, it is where they wake up every morning. Every meal, every night's sleep, and every winter takes place in air containing roughly half the oxygen available at sea level. Winter temperatures often fall below -30 degrees Celsius. Powerful winds sweep across the plateau, and frozen ground makes building and repairing homes extremely difficult. Thick stone walls and small windows help hold on to every bit of warmth allowing families to make it through winter on the high plateau. As the sun sets behind Puma Yumko Lake, smoke still rises from the stone rooftops. It is a sign that tomorrow, this village will wake up once again at an altitude where most people can remain for only a short time. Just Room Enough Island. Take a few wrong steps outside this house, and you could already find yourself in the St. Lawrence River. Just Room Enough Island covers only about 3,300 square feet, so small that after the Sizeland family built a house, planted a tree, and set out a few chairs, most of the available land was already taken up. The walls sit so close to the edge of the island that there is almost no yard acting as a buffer between the home and the water. Waves can break right against the land in front of the house, and the island itself has to remain above water year-round to qualify as an island within the Thousand Islands archipelago. From above, the house takes up nearly the entire patch of land in the middle of the river. Walk just a few steps from the front door, and you have almost crossed all the ground this family has to call home. Most of us spend our lives looking for a place to call home. But for the people in this video, the hardest part was finding a place where they could build that first roof over their heads. It might be a tree trunk deep in the forest, a precarious cliff face, or a patch of water in the middle of the sea. Each place tells a different story, but they all lead to the same result. People have transformed places that seemed impossible to live in into homes that have lasted for generations. If you want to keep exploring the world's strangest places, most unbelievable structures, and stories that make you see the world in a completely different way, hit like, subscribe, and join us on the journeys ahead. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.